Welcome to the MindBod Adventure Pod, where every week we dive into a different practice, a different perspective on life, and you come along to try it with us. Join us on Substack at mindbodpod.com to watch this episode as a video podcast. And if you want to support our crazy adventures and get fun perks like our weekly after party videos, consider becoming a paid subscriber. And now, on to this week's adventure.
Celina de Leon, welcome to the MindBod Adventure Pod. Very happy to have you here.
And as you can see, we're clearly both got the message about wearing tropical shirts today.
Yeah. So I'm thrilled to be able to have this conversation with you, Celina, because we know each other. We have, in fact, did a retreat together years ago, as you said before we jumped on here, in another life, which was so fun down in Costa Rica, where the idea was to really explore these two things, the medicine of ayahuasca on the one hand, and what role meditation might play in sort of stabilizing and helping with integration. And we did that, and we had a fabulous week together. And now I get to introduce you to the world, and I'm dying to have you say a little bit about, yourself and I guess your journey and how you got into doing the work you do, and then anything about that and the practice that you're going to guide us in, and then that'll lead us in a whole other adventure. So welcome.
All right, great. Well, really great to be here with both of you. Yeah, it's just such a pleasure to share in these types of spaces. So a little bit about me. As you mentioned, Jeff, I am an ayahuasca practitioner, or in the tradition that I'm trained in, it's actually called the Ahe. That's one of the things that I am and that I do in the world. But I've been working with ayahuasca for a little over 20 years, and I have been training in a particular lineage from the Upper Putumayo of Colombia, from the Kamcha indigenous community, for about 16 years now. And I am the founder of the Circle of Sacred Nature Church here in the United States. I'm based in Marin County. And yes, I've been facilitating this work. I also lead retreats in Costa Rica at a retreat center that I'm really connected to, that I co-manage, called Posada Natura. And I lead retreats in Colombia, where my teacher is from. And I do open retreats. I have co-founded an addiction program that I've run a few cohorts out of. And I also am an adjunct faculty at the Graduate Theological Union, where I teach a class on entheogens, psychedelics, and spiritual care. And I teach that in the interreligious chaplaincy program. And I've been doing that I'm actually going to be teaching my second year starting this semester. And I'm just really interested. I'd say, there's so much happening in the space of the expansion of psychedelics and a lot of attention that's being drawn to all this. And, I think there's a lot of attention that's coming to this area from the angle of science and psychology and mental health, which I think is so important and so valuable. And I feel like another really valuable perspective of looking at these medicines is from a spiritual care perspective, and really looking at how they help our spiritual lives. And I think in that way, I am really interested, excited, and engaged in the relationship specifically between psychedelics / entheogens and contemplative practice. And I think that's where we get excited together about that conversation of, just because in a lot of ways, I feel like when these experiences are approached with respect and intention, to me, it really is a contemplative practice. And when we look at the roots of these traditions in indigenous settings, I believe that it is a form of an indigenous contemplative practice in a way. Granted that we're working a lot of times with these powerful medicines, but when we're in those spaces, I think a lot of the same principles apply that apply to meditation, yoga, other contemplative practice training. And with that, I'll also just share, I also have a longstanding practice in yoga and in meditation. It was actually my entrance into thinking about our expanded perspectives on wellness. And then when I was a senior in college, I was actually in an ecological anthropology class at Stanford. I was navigating my own kind of struggles at that time with various things. And I had to write a final paper, and I was in Green Library, and I was looking at anthropological accounts of the Amazon, and I read about ayahuasca, and I was just completely enthralled that it even existed, that there was such a thing as a medicine for the spirit, and like, what is this? And I just knew I wanted to experience it, and I knew it would help me. At that time, it wasn't nearly as accessible as it is now. So it took some years before I could even access the experience. And it ended up being very, very helpful for me. Granted, it wasn't like a one-shot ceremony type of fix it deal, but it really opened a lot of things for me. And I knew that it would be a part of my path. I didn't know how it would actually shape up as it has. That's a whole other story, but that's kind of my origin story with this work. And yeah, I think I'll just stop there. So I could go on and on, but that's the first pass at my background.
Oh my gosh. Well, there's so much to there's so much to talk about here. I mean, I think one of the things I'm so excited about in this conversation is, first of all, to really, this is going to be the first time on our podcast that we're really had a chance to go deep into ayahuasca in particular, about the nature of that medicine, the nature of, I mean, I'm really excited to do that because it has a specific kind of feeling working with that medicine. And there's a specific way, for me anyway, that the insights kind of emerge and the relationship with that plant. And because so much of the discussion these days on psychedelics is so secular, it's so, this is about optimizing your mental health. This is about creating more neuroplasticity so you can get more work done. And there is, of course, a spiritual element to the discussions around, kind of, it puts you in touch with being and the bigger picture, and it can change your outlook on life. But I think when you mean spiritual care, you probably mean that. And also, I imagine there's more there, or there's other elements to that. And that's maybe what I'd love to ask you a little bit about right now. Like, when you talk about that medicine as being about spiritual care, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that invitation to even speak about that. Because to me, when I think about spiritual care, it's as much about our own spiritual care as it relates to ourselves, and I think our spiritual life, which is unique to every person. And I think that it's important to really honor that diversity, and honor what it is for each of us to cultivate that in a really personal way based on our life experience, our ancestry, our relationship with land, with all of the things. And in that way, I feel like spiritual care also inherently relates to our connections with things beyond ourselves. And I think, to me, that's actually like one of the things that I really hope to see in the psychedelic renaissance at large, is just more appreciation of how so much of the times of what can be so healing about these medicines is how they facilitate profound sense of interconnection and connection with things outside of ourselves. But then what is it for us to, and this is unique for every person, to take the next step of considering what our responsibility is then to being and feeling that profound interconnection with everything else. And so for me, when it comes to working with practices that have an indigenous origin, like for me with ayahuasca, I take really seriously the importance of reciprocity and supporting the community, for example, where the lineage that I've trained comes from. And that's a really important aspect of my work. And I know that it's going to look different for every person, but I would say that that's something that I think is just really sad that we're not seeing more of that in the psychedelic renaissance space. Like, I mean, it could be a whole a whole conversation, but just to like briefly touch on it, for example, a lot of the research that's happening right now with psilocybin, it's getting a lot of attention. There's millions of dollars that are going into scientific research, into commercialization. And like, is there really like the meaningful conversation about supporting where that lineage comes from and where the lineages are that support that type of work? So I think it's like a whole bigger conversation that I think that we as a community need to be engaging in more. All that to say, yes, spiritual care to me is an opportunity to have a more expanded view of what these practices are and how they can be of benefit.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the medicine does point you that way oftentimes too. I mean, it is about giving you that firsthand experience of that interconnectivity, those connections. And there's a reason people come out of those kinds of ceremonies and start to rethink some of these basic values and things that they've done in their life, and often towards a direction of more service. So
And I was going to mention that as well, because both of you have been talking about how we kind of couch all these things in scientific terms right now because, with the psychedelic renaissance, we're talking about neuroplasticity and individual functioning and brain functioning. And it feels like a kind of like a makeshift way of getting a pass on it. Like the people who've tried it, including researchers, it's like you experience the profoundness of it and how it makes you realize that you're connected to all things. But science and the world at large, we don't have a language that even values that. So then, a researcher is like, wow, this is really amazing. How can I sell this to like the board? Or, it's like talk about neurons and talk about neurotransmitters and stuff like that. But it does really feel like at the heart of this movement, it's people who've tasted the benefits of it and are like, how can we make this a thing right now? So it's weird because I hate having that be the benchmark that says like, yes, we're allowed to use this now, but it feels like a necessary evil somehow in our community.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just shared. And I think too, like all things, it's like, what is it to be with the both and to be with that tension and embrace that possibility. And just also this like amazing time that we're in, that all these experiences are becoming more accessible. There's the regulatory landscapes are dramatically changing. It's making it be more accessible to a wider audience that then makes it more diverse in terms of who's actually accessing these experiences. And I will say that what you just mentioned is also one of the things that I'm really excited about is what is it actually to give more expanded language to these experiences. And in that way, it really is this powerful ripple effect where we can even just like as community, as people just have more language for these types of experiences. And I think that that extends to contemplative practice, to our spiritual lives. And in many ways, psychedelics or entheogens or plant medicines, whatever we want to call them, really provides, not always, but sometimes a really direct access point for a lot of people to then open up that next scale of possibility.
So cool.
Well, so you're going to guide us in a practice. Could you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I am going to guide us through a practice that is going to just take us to have an opportunity to access the space of an altered state experience. I'm just going to take us through that. So, shall we start?
Absolutely.
Yes,
And this is, as you pointed out at the beginning, this is something that really can be a way to kind of set us up for any kind of ceremony, whether
Yes,
it's a meditation, anything that we're going to do that's intentional. And so it has very broad applications too.
definitely. Definitely. All right. So, just going to invite us all to just take our seat and feel our body. And if it feels good to you, invite you to close your eyes. And let us just ground here into this moment together, bringing our awareness to our breath. And let us just gently, so gently, bring our attention through a really just gentle body scan, just noticing if we're holding tension anywhere. Let us just tune in with our breath to just invite a little bit of release, of softness. Now, as we sit here together, just want to invite us all to access an experience that you might have had with ceremony, with meditation, with a psychedelic. See if you can bring your attention to just access that space really gently. Maybe it's a particular lesson or a particular time in the tradition that I'm trained in. We believe that what can come from the ceremonies is a seed that can be planted in us. And it's up to us how we nourish that seed. So I invite you to just bring your attention to just encountering, visualizing what that seed is for you in this moment. Maybe it's something specific or general. It's whatever feels meaningful to you right now. Just find that place and just notice where it kind of lands in your body. Does it feel like it's in your mind, your heart, your solar plexus? Maybe all of them. Let us just give some awareness to that, some awareness to accessing the teachings, our own teachings, our own innate intelligence, our inner guides. And as we hold that seed within us, let us just go through our elemental nature and bringing some awareness and some nurturing to that. Many of our earth wisdom traditions, we work with the elements, the sacred earth, fire, water, air. Let us ground into the earth element. Let us ground our seed into the earth of our body. Maybe your seed is already sprouted. Let us nourish it. Let us ground. I'll invite you to bring in your awareness to the element of water. What is it to water our seed? How can we bring the fluidity, the nourishment to supporting us and growing that intention through the waters of our body, the water that we take in? How can we find connection through the element of water and supporting us? Let us now shift our attention to the energy of fire, of transformation, of heat. Let us reflect on that energy. How that can support us in nourishing this seed, bringing it energy, light, awareness. What needs to be burned away to bring us closer to the light of our own inner teachings. Let us now shift our attention to the energy of air, wind, breath. To the power of our breath, how our breath may nourish this seed, that with every breath we have an opportunity to come closer to ourselves, to our inner teaching, to our inner teachings, to that seed. Invite us to take one deep, intentional breath together. Now let us just sit for a few moments, allowing that practice to integrate. And then we may gently open our eyes.
That felt very medicinal. That was like good medicine for today. Yeah. How you doing, Jeffy?
That was beautiful.
It was really beautiful.
Well, it's interesting. It really took me back to doing ceremony with you, actually. Um, yeah, I went right back to, I think the thing I love most about ceremony, however interesting the insights are during the kind of, what would you call it, more explosive phase, the more intense phase at the beginning. To me, it's the before and after. It's the watching you as an example prepare the space and light the candles and begin to say some prayers, and the deliberate way you move your hands, and you start to move, and that was the seed for me. You move into this understanding of the sacredness of the present. Purely the present is sacred. And it's through that intentionality of you knowing that, and everyone, there's a respectfulness and a quiet that descends. And that's the same feeling after the ceremony too, when people are sharing. There's just everything is in the right place, as I put it from a meditation piece. You look out sometimes from a meditation, everything is in the right place. That bird passing at just that time, that sound from the forest, that breath that person makes, that insight, it's all like you could not have, it's intelligent. And so that seed is to remember that that is true all the time. That's why we need ceremony, to help us remember in that way.
Yeah, exactly that. I just would have not put it in those words. I was thinking of Jeff and I recently did ketamine ceremony with some friends of ours in New York, Cardea. And during the ceremony, like, there was a ton of hilarious things that happened, or like really profound things. Jeff saw God. He was like, "Hello, God." Oh, there you are.
I did. I got
And
godded.
he got Godded. Yeah. So he was having this like very like vibrant beings were showing up, and we did it together in the same room because that's what besties do. But for mine was like really like nonverbal existing, and I had this strong sense of like the presence of this like feminine eternal entity, that, and like the transmission was just like we're all always here, like, yes, stuff goes on, but it's like, and there's living and then there's dying and all sorts of cycles, but like the bedrock is like consciousness continues, or like we're all always here. And That's the seed that I was tapping into during this meditation, and it's exactly the same because that feeling is just you sink past the busyness and the point A to point B-ness and the goal-orientedness, and everything kinda just spreads out from the present moment, and you just like, it's just like, this eternal
Yeah.
field, and you could just feel held by it, and there's like a safety, a clarity, an intelligence, like you said, and yeah, and I think people underestimate how important the container of ceremony is for experiencing that because you make really, really important things that you would just gloss over, like a lighting of a candle or a lighting of an incense or the lighting in the room, and you're basically just saying, "Here, right now is very important." It's the most important thing. Yeah.
So true. So true. Yeah. I always reflect like after like retreats or ceremony weekends of just how powerful they are, even if there wasn't the medicine there, of just that power of ritual, of ceremony, of being with others with that intentionality is such deep medicine. I feel like for our culture, for our times, for all that we're all navigating. And I think in that way, it's actually like one of the deepest gifts I think from indigenous traditions that I feel like we draw a lot from that even in the psychedelic spaces that exist now, even if you're not working with indigenous medicines. I actually think it's something really beautiful that's happening. Like as you were sharing in your ketamine session, that there's more awareness of the power of that. And on one hand, I feel like indigenous traditions offer that, but at the same time, like, I think it's actually just a very human experience that, like, we are humans of ritual and ceremony, and that's actually something ubiquitous in, like, all cultures, and it's something that I think is so important for us.
Yeah, it was interesting. So Tasha mentioned that the ketamine ceremony that we did, and it had a very particular phenomenology. There's a
Yeah,
particular feeling of what it is to go into that ceremony. That's very different than working with ayahuasca. And
yeah.
I'm just curious for you, how would you describe, that's a big question.
How do you describe
What is,
ayahuasca as
who
a
is
place?
ayahuasca to you? Who is that? What is your experience when you come into relationship with that medicine? What do you notice in other people? I mean, that's distinctly ayahuascarian.
It's a really great way of putting it. Well, I really feel and believe that like all the different medicines have their own quality and just also want to like really say before I share what I'm going to share that these medicines like they're not necessarily right for everybody, and I think that's so important that every person really finds their own discernment about what's actually like medicine for them and that it's different for all of us and that
And at different times in your life as well.
yes, yes, totally, totally. And that said, I feel like what's maybe distinct about ayahuasca, I really feel like it's a medicine that it can often take some time to build relationship with it. Like there really is, and I think this is the same with other medicines. I certainly have I have experience with other entheogenic medicines, but much more with ayahuasca. So when I speak of it, I'm definitely speaking from that lens of just having more time with it. But I do, after working with people for many, many years, what I see is that for a lot of people, it really does take time to build that relationship. And that really has its own timing for every person. And I kind of like equate it with like dating in a way. For like sometimes it's like you really just get there quickly. Other times it's like you're friends for a long time before you like get more intimate. And like, so I think that can often be the case with ayahuasca. And I also feel kind of like what you were mentioning before, Jeff. I feel that the ayahuasca also is so beautiful in that what you experience in the ceremony itself, I really feel is just like one tiny slice of the pie of like how it will continue to work with you over time. And what I really see a lot of the times for people who maybe have a really challenging experience in ceremony, or they maybe feel like they didn't really feel anything in the ceremony, but then afterwards, they really feel profound changes in their life in various ways, and they end up coming back. because they're so pleased with what's happening in their life, aside from the quote unquote experience that they had in the ceremony itself. And to me, I think that whatever medicine, whatever practice that one is doing, like that's the real litmus test of if that's good medicine for you. It's like, how do you feel in your life? And like, how are you engaged in that way, whether that experience was helpful or not? And yeah, and then finally, I think you can't really talk about ayahuasca without talking about the purge that can happen, and like making relationship and friends with that is definitely a journey for some people.
Oh, yeah.
And
Ayahuasca is like the last holdout for me. I've ventured into all of them except for ayahuasca. Because for me, it's like, uh, time and place. For me, things have like presented themselves, and I'm like, yeah, this is the time. Like I remember in 2012, I was feeling really like kind of like heart closed, and this opportunity came for me to try MDMA for the first time in 2012, and I was like, let's try it. I was like, that was the perfect medicine for me for like this 2-year chunk, and then I was like, I'm done with that. But ayahuasca is the one that I've always been wanting to, but not feeling ready, feeling terrified mostly of the purge because I hate nausea and I always get nauseous. And so, yes, please tell us about that relationship with that, because I want to get over my fear of barfing and pooping everywhere.
yeah, I mean, it's totally natural to like have those concerns and fears. I work with a lot of people that navigate that. And I think like the main kind of principles around it are that the purge is not what you had for lunch that day or for breakfast. And it really is a medium of concentrating kind of like energetic, spiritual, emotional, physical discordance, like in a way, and releasing it from the system. And that can be really, really profound. And sometimes it can feel challenging, but it's definitely in the lineage that I'm trained in many different ayahuasca lineages. It's really considered to be like a profoundly healing part of that medicine.
Yeah,
So.
it's so interesting because maybe it's because of all the ayahuasca that I've done, but I have a very vivid experiences when I do the medicine. It's been quite a few years, but it would be of the purging, but not just the purging, kind of the yawning, the belching, the releasing things, and you feel a kind of unburdening. And now, years later, when I do like say a trauma therapy or even sometimes in meditation or different kinds of things, that happens. Not the vomiting, but I start to do the yawning, the belching. It's like it's like ayahuasca prepared the ground in a way. And I can feel that what it's doing is it's a release of not just tension, but it's just the way in which we hold these different things in our bodies. And the emotional, psycho-spiritual dynamics are all in the body. And so you can get these very targeted sorts of releases that then afterwards you really feel like, oh, wow. And it often with ayahuasca, it might be combined with some imagery around a particular person or something. And then you might feel actually less reactive around your dad now, or who knows what. It can be very specific in that way. And it gave me a way to really start to notice how that's happening in other contexts too.
Yeah. I found that experience of like purging or just like going over this threshold of some kind happens in almost every practice. If you're watching,
Yeah.
it happens in every practice. Some are more forceful and obvious than others. But the time that I realized that was I do these like longer retreats with my teacher in the Tibetan tradition. And a couple of years ago, we go to like down to Shokin in Mexico, which is in the biosphere just south of Tulum, and it's beautiful down there. And but to get there, as soon as you pass Tulum, it's just like dirt roads that are constantly like the potholes are big enough to fit my body, after a hurricane. So it ends up being this like 4-hour drive in a car, and you're going like this. And the first time I ever went, it was like me, my teacher, and two more in our crew, and we're just driving this car, and I had to stop and puke. It was like maybe every 15 minutes. Like it got to the point I was delirious. I couldn't look. I was like, just get there, please. But then we got there, and my teacher said like that in our tradition, it's called nundro, which is kind of like the preparation, the threshold, the test, And we got there, and she's like, "You're gonna have a great retreat. Like you had your preparation on the road there." And I did. It was like one of the most transformative retreats I've ever
Yeah.
had because I just went through it for like 5 hours, And so definitely now I notice it every time I do a retreat. Something happens at the beginning,
Yeah.
or if I'm doing a practice or doing a new medicine or something like that, it's always there. but I am terrified because I hate them so much. I'm terrified of ayahuasca because I know that that's like the pinnacle.
Sometimes it's so gentle,
Really?
so
Yeah,
so soft.
exactly. Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that's also a very distinct quality of ayahuasca is how mysterious it is.
So
That
mysterious.
that a lot of the times, especially when, like, we're coming with the expectation or the thing, it's like, "No, no, no, no. It's not about that."
Almost
Like, it
always like
could
that.
be, like, very,
That's my
very
number one experience of it. It's like, no,
Mhm.
no, no. You thought you knew what you're doing. You go in, you're like, I'm gonna do this, this, and this.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you have your little agenda from the
Within the
West. Like,
first 5
I've
seconds.
got my list.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be doing this, this, and this. Check. And it's
Yeah.
just like, no, 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 no.
That
First,
happens
I'm
to
gonna
me.
kick your ass
Yeah.
because you're an idiot. And then I'm gonna kick your ass 2 more times. And then I'm gonna show you this beautiful thing.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then because
That happens to me with salvia. I work with salvia a lot, and just because it's, like, so nice and fast and I can get in there, ask my questions, set my intentions, get my ass whooped, and get back out in, like, an hour. But, like, I always, and this is after I've been working with it for, like, 10 years. Every single time I go in being like, I don't know, there's this, like, arrogance of, like, you think you know what you're gonna get or something, and within
exactly.
the first 10 seconds of it hitting, I'm like, "You idiot." It's like, nothing that you thought you were
Because
gonna do.
I
That's what
haven't
it's for, it's for eroding
yeah,
it.
I mean,
Yeah.
it shows you. It's like it shows you the ridiculousness of your
Yeah,
arrogant human
yeah,
assumptions, and like how many times have I been? It's like, no, there's a much bigger world here.
absolutely.
But yet, the thing the medicine would show me again and again is how I build this treehouse in my brain about how I think things are, and then I'm like, and even as she's showing me that, or the medicine is showing me that, I'm doing that. I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
rationalizing what I'm seeing, and then she's no, 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 and then like disintegrating it again. But it's like what it's you're pointing to again and again. It seems is mystery, mystery, humility, humility.
Really
Like
that.
get on your knees, and even like, when you set us up in that little meditation, I could feel that. That's why I love bringing in the
Oh,
elements.
yeah.
Like I could feel that. Like it's like really to be paying attention to earth, to water, to air. It's like coming back and to be in this state of respectful humility with the world around us. And like we just pave that over. And again, it feels like that's the place that we come to through these ceremonies.
yeah, definitely. And I feel too, it's like just the humility and the way that it's so easy to forget, right? And I think this is actually like the beautiful relationship between these more kind of expanded state practices and contemplative practice of like what it is to just continually create the space so that we can return over and over and over again. And as we know, even as seasoned practitioners, it's constantly forgetting and remembering and needing to remember. And what is it to just be in that dance and be in that comfort and discomfort of knowing how fast we slip and need to come back. And I think that's why the importance of community, of practice, of consistency, of finding pathways to constantly recommit ourselves to what it is to find those spaces in ourselves.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that in specific. There's a sort of an idea that like a lot of people have is like they're going to do this big giant ceremony and it's going to change their life and everything's going to get sorted out by
And
then.
they'll be like, check, done with that.
But in indigenous traditions, it seems much more like it's a practice. Like you go in and you do it, you may do it a few times a year and every time it reorients you. And then you think about what happened afterwards and you try to stay connected to that through your other practices. And then when the time's right, you go back in again. And that it's not just a kind of one-off thing. So I want to first ask you about that, about the rhythm of practice within the tradition that you learned, how people think about that.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. I think it's very unique. I think it's very unique for every person, and even in the tradition that I'm trained in, it's engaged with more as a traditional medicine than a spiritual practice per se, actually, which is interesting. Like, there are some people certainly in the community that relate to it as a spiritual practice, and I see how they work with it over time, over years, but it's not that way for everyone. Like, it definitely isn't. And I think that in many Indigenous communities, it's that way. It's treated as a traditional medicine, and some people engage with it as a spiritual practice. In other communities, it's entirely a spiritual practice. Like recently, I had the opportunity to sit with a family from the Yawanawa community of Brazil, and their ceremony was completely different than anything that I had experienced in my Colombian tradition. It was all about the spirit of the ceremony was much more celebratory. There was dancing. There was like this whole community experience of it. It was so profoundly beautiful. And it was totally different than what I have experienced. So I think even I always like to be careful not to like put indigenous into like one box, like me, because there's so much diversity with indigeneity and different traditions and all that. And I think similarly, we're at a time right now where because we have so much access to these practices and experiences, I think again, it comes back to a person being really discerning about what's right for them. What does that relationship look like that's going to be different than the person next to you? And that's beautiful, but to really embrace that diversity. I will say too that having the experience of working within the church and nonprofit organization that I have, we have people who have been sitting in community together for more than 10 years. And it really is our spiritual practice. And it is as close to like church or spiritual community because it's not just about us having our own personal experience of it. We know that when we come to that space, we are in community and we're praying for ourselves and we're praying for the world, and it has that spirit to it. And then when I do an addiction program, it's different. To me, it's still a spiritual practice, but people are coming to that for more, I would say, a more therapeutic, still to me, spiritual care, but from more of that lens. So I think it just, yeah, really depends on what feels right for a person and how that translates in their life.
Have you ever had to really back off yourself from the medicine, like taking breaks from it or stop doing it altogether for a while?
I definitely have. I would say that really one of the main reasons why that happened was more because of childbirth and having children. So I have 3 kids. I have a almost 15-year-old, a 5.5-year-old, and a almost 3.5-year-old. So definitely just navigating motherhood and just what that is in relationship to being in ceremony work has kind of facilitated its own like big breaks for me. And then aside from that, I feel like it's a constant communication that I have with myself of what feels like the right cadence for me to be facilitating work versus not. So, yeah, it just kind of depends on the timing.
Yeah, because I definitely had a period where I was like, okay, enough. Like I did, just like you said, that relationship at first, it was sort of like I had all these ideals and expectations and it wasn't working out like that. Then as I got humbler, felt that relationship come online and just like it was so wonderful. But then I kept doing it, and it took me a while to realize it was sort of diminishing returns. And not only that, that I felt almost like I was opening up a portal to a lot of spiritual stuff pouring into me that I wasn't ready for, that I didn't have the grounding, and I had to sort of back off from it. And that's kind of what you said. Like you have to, you're your own teacher and knowing what the pace is. And I haven't really done it since then. And that was sort of 6 years ago, probably.
Yeah, so important, and I feel like it's something that I have a conversation with people about often of like, okay, what is really drawing a person to whether it's ayahuasca or something else? It's an important conversation to be happening, and I think that especially now in Canada, similar in the United States, and pretty much any major city in the world right now, these experiences are quite accessible. So it's like, what is it to really be in right relationship with them? And I think too, also just the settings in which they happen. So for example, even in the setting that I work with, Circle of Sacred Nature with the church, like I feel that when people come to commune with ayahuasca, it also doesn't, and this is just distinct to the way that I work, it doesn't always have to be going for a peak experience. It can be gentle. It can be just communing with it in a softer way. And not all settings have that opportunity to engage with it in that way. But I think that that's also something that people can consider, that it's not always having to access the non dual experience, the complete disintegration of the self. And like, yeah, those can be helpful for sure. And also, are there other ways to be engaging with that that maybe are softer and that are just a little bit more gradual in terms of how you work with it?
Yeah, for me personally, I will say now that I think of it, and in the past, that's a big reason why I don't think I've done ayahuasca before. Because for me personally, I I've indigenous backgrounds, mixed ones, and teach in a lineage. And so I love the container of that kind of tradition and just history and like knowing that you're being held by this like, several millennia old tradition. And so I find it really hard to practice in spaces that either the instructor doesn't come from that or the people that are in it are just kind of tourists through it. And so, I mean, obviously, if I looked, Jeff would have been like, "Hey, meet Celina," you know. But so many of the practitioners that I've come across, it feels kind of like they've picked it up because it's cool or they had a peak experience and want to share it. And so many people are like thrill seeking. And I don't mean that in a bad way because sometimes that's how the beginning of your spiritual experience manifests, right? Like you have a peak experience and you're like, wait, what was that? And you should try to get it again. But I have a hard time letting go and experiencing those spaces because there's always a part of me that feels like I'm protecting myself, from I don't know, whatever, just something that's not part of what should be in that practice. So, how does a practitioner kind of navigate that based on what's around them? Like a practitioner like you may not be accessible to them where they are, but they have this draw to the medicine. But how do you protect yourself from, I don't know, charlatans in the worst case, but just inexperienced medicine practitioners?
Mm. Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it's really much more common now, just given kind of the nature of the field. And I think it's kind of like really just like being unapologetic about like asking those questions, like with somebody that you're considering sitting with. And like I think a person really has a right to know what they're stepping into. And as you mentioned, I think for any experience like this, safety is the most important. Like you will not get the most out of these experiences if you don't feel safe. You just won't. So I think it's really, really important to make sure that you're really clear about who you're working with in these types of spaces. And there's a lot of everything right now. So really important to be discerning about it and to take your time. Like I really appreciate one of the fundamental teachings of my teacher around this work is faith and patience. And I feel like the patience especially is so important for all of us in the culture that we swim in and in having access to these experiences and these medicines. What is it to like really be patient with it and to really be emotionally honest with ourselves about why we're stepping into these spaces and what we're hoping to get out of them and what we really need before and afterwards for those experiences to be truly nourishing for us. And it's deeply personal for every person. So,
So
yeah.
beautifully said.
Yeah.
I'm curious to ask you more about. I don't know if we have time now because it's been so great already, but just about working with the addiction work that you do, what that looks like.
Yeah, well, thanks. The program that I've been part of, it's called Natura Care Programs, and it's actually a 3-month program that we did. And the whole idea of it is how to really support people before, during the medicine itself, and then afterward. So there's a whole portion that happens online, which is focused on individual and group counseling, contemplative practice instruction, just like a group gathering to really create that field together. And then that's followed by a 2-week retreat at Posada Natura, where participants experience 3 ayahuasca ceremonies and other supportive practices, more contemplative practice instruction. We also work with different plant medicine modalities that I've been trained in to work with addiction in particular. And then after those 2 weeks, people return home or to their recovery setting. And then there's a whole integration focus that supports people with integrating those experiences. So we've now run the cohort twice, and we're actually in a whole journey right now of evaluating if we're going to keep that same model or if we're going to shorten it a little bit to make it more accessible. So we're actually in the whole reflection process about how we want to move forward with it right now. But it was really, really beautiful. And I could say a lot about it, but like the little bit that I'll say about it is that we worked with people from all different backgrounds. So we really held this expanded view of what is addiction really. And like, I think that could be a whole a whole conversation of like, aren't we all kind of addicted in ways? But like we hold this like very expanded space of, what is addiction really? So we worked with people who had substance use challenges, but also people with process addictions. We also worked with people who were in recovery, but were really clear that they hadn't actually accessed the emotional or spiritual wounds or world that led them to those destructive kind of behaviors. So they wanted to come and work with the medicine to get a deeper understanding of what that was. So it was really neat to actually just have people coming from very different backgrounds to work collectively in a space like that.
Oh gosh, what an incredible offering. Well, if you, I guess the last thing is just anything else that you feel like is important to mention in the context of ceremony and this particular medicine and the work that you do that we didn't get a chance to touch in, and we'll probably have to get you on again. Maybe we should do a whole episode on it. We've touched on addiction before from different perspectives. It'd be kind of cool to do like a round table, actually.
Oh yeah, for sure.
For a few people from different traditions or modalities talking about addiction and ways of getting at it, because it's such a huge issue. And as you said, it's not just, this person over here who's addicted to the substance. It's like, it's really
much broader.
It's the addiction in all of us.
It's like how good are you at masking
exactly
the desire to fill that hole? Some of us aren't very good. Yeah, the hungry ghost. Some of us mask it with things that are socially acceptable, like overworking and
totally agree.
Cell phones.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I actually feel like we covered so much ground. I feel like it's just like, it's such a joy to be in these collective spaces together. And I guess my final words would just be, carry on, friends. Like we're all in this together, and it's just one step at a time. And may we all just find the practices and the spaces that are truly nourishing for us. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Celina, so great to see you again. So great to have you on. Thank you.
And now, join us for the after party at mindbodpod.com, where me and Jeff talk candidly about whatever didn't get said in this week's episode, and chat in the comments with the whole MindBod squad. Don't forget to subscribe for new episodes every week, and if you want to support our crazy adventures, consider becoming a paid subscriber on Substack at mindbodpod.com. See you there.